Christian Rufert, founder and CEO of Teragence. It's a pleasure to have you on the Geospatial Index.
Hi, Will. The pleasure is all mine.
What is the elevator pitch for Teragence?
Our elevator pitch is that we provide mobile data that is, or mobile network insights that are location specific, quantitative and transparent, and that we do that in a bite-size commercial construct. Now, as an elevator pitch, that isn't the greatest one. It's quite elaborate, but I'm kind of partial to it because I think each word in that pitch has a very specific meaning. So the first one, very quickly, location specific means we provide data about specific locations. So not areas, not towns, but with a granularity of 50 meters by 50 meters. For those who are in the geo world, our favorite poison is the H3 indexing, H3 index level 11. So we always talk about H3 11. People who are in the know, and other people should look into it. Anyways, that's the location specific. The quantitative part is we provide a number, right? We say this is the signal strength that you can expect, and it's a number. It's not a qualitative indication. The last part, or almost last part, is transparency. So we tell people how we got to that number and how confident we are, right? So that they can know to what extent they can rely on our judgment. We don't pretend to know everything about everywhere, but therefore we say, we think it's this, and this is how much confidence we have, or here are indicators of how we got to that, which allows users to get their own thing. And then the last part, bite size. So people can buy that data from us from anywhere from 50 pounds a month or 50 pounds on a purchase to 50,000 pounds. So we don't have big aggressive minimum standards of what you have to purchase with it. We want to make it easy because we address a lot of long tail use cases for which people don't necessarily want to spend a lot of money. So that's who we are. That was quite long, so my apologies for that.
No, you've provided a few pointers there actually to a couple of items forwards in the agenda, for example, to do with addressing customer needs. On the way there, I'll need to ask you though about the niche that you dominate and who your ideal customer is.
Okay, that's an interesting question. I don't know if we dominate our niche, but we operate in a certain niche. And that is the niche of our ideal customers. And it's actually not one niche, it's multiple niches. And again, the description that we provide is not very succinct, so bear with me. So who do we serve? We serve any business or any organization that depends on mobile connectivity for their success, right? So it's not the providers, it's not the supply side, it's not the mobile operators, it's people that depend on the mobile operators for their success. And people then always go, well, it's not the mobile operators and it's not the regulators, who is it, right? And we always, there's a few examples that bring that to life. So one example is, for example, what is called IoT or Internet of Things. And here we have a story of one of our customers that called us was a business that operated in the area of garden equipment, so lawnmowers and leaf blowers. And we thought, okay, this is kind of odd. So they called us and they told us this story that they had developed a robotic lawnmower. So kind of like a Roomba, where a Roomba cleans the dust off your floor, a robotic lawnmower goes over your lawn all day and makes it nice and trim. Of course, the challenge of the robotic lawnmower is that it should stop at the edge of the lawn and not go into the flowers because you want to mow the grass, not the flowers. The traditional way in which that has been done is people would dig a cable at the edge of the lawn. That cable sends out a magnetic field. The lawnmower hits the magnetic field, turns back, and does its thing again. But of course, you're digging up the lawn to lay that cable to make a nice lawn, which is kind of a contradiction in terms. So now the next generation robotic lawnmowers depends on very precise GPS technology and a data backhaul over cellular. Now, when people came into this company showrooms and said, oh, I quite fancy a robotic lawnmower, people say, we have this fantastic thing. It'll cost you £1,000. We'll come and install it next week. And next week, the installer would come and find out that the connectivity, the mobile connectivity in that specific location was not what they could have expected it to be. And basically at that point, they lost a sale of £1,000. So we provide them with a service that is an API into their sales platform that when a customer comes in, they can do a quick address check and say, is the connectivity going to be sufficient to support this lawnmower? And this is kind of like, a long tail use case, but if there are many different use cases across different sectors. Another sector is everything to do with real estate and retail real estate, where mobile connectivity indoor matters not only for the shoppers, but also for the connectivity that is often provided for things like points of sale. That connectivity is often not provided through fixed broadband routers, but through mobile broadband routers. And again, you want to be sure that when the day comes that you're going to open your new store, that the router that you've installed is going to work. We provide that service that says it's going to work. So it's a bunch of long tail niche use cases across different sectors that when you add them up, hopefully will add up to a significant business.
All right. I've suddenly realized we can draw a line under things now. From this point forward in the modern world, we're all about precision, GPS-guided robotic lawnmowers and geospatial services. There's a legitimate customer base to do with geospatial services here.
There is.
Where you can set up a business to inform whether that will work. I love this.
Yeah. There's. I went to Las Vegas to CES, and there you see all those kind of things that on the surface you go, what? Who came up with that idea? And you go, yeah, it kind of makes sense. And then my brain goes, yeah, but if you want it to make sense, you're going to need us, right? There's we are that little thing that comes at the end of that entire logic that people go, oh, yes, we need one of those. And we go, here we are. That's our business.
Okay, so I always like to dig a little bit on guests addressing customer needs and working backwards from them. So you mentioned CES there. Often guests will mention conferences that they attend to detect these customer needs. Is there anything else that you do to make sure you're fully aware of the customer needs that exist?
It's an interesting one. And my guiding principles when it comes to customer needs and in the business that we are in is this quote from Henry Ford that said, if I listened to my customers, I would have made a faster horse.
Yes.
Right. And what that means is customers have problems, but the answer to that problem is not the answer they necessarily formulate. Right.
Gotcha.
So, for example, in this real estate retail use case that I illustrated, the standard way of solving that tends to be, we're going to send out a guy with a measuring stick or a measuring device to do that. And we need to find a cheaper way of doing a survey. Can we crowdsource people going in with their phones or something like that? Right? Whereas our solution, it listens to the need, but it doesn't listen to the solution formulation that the customer has done. We go with something else. And that kind of creates challenges all in and of itself.
But I love the message to be intentional and deliberate about that, because you're talking about, I guess, a trap that people often get into.
Yes. Cool. And it's an interesting one and it's a challenging one because, but I'll come back to that in a second. So what we do, our process, if it can be described like that, I mean, the interesting thing is if you're somebody says the story always makes sense afterwards, not when you're in it. So this is the story afterwards that packages this very chaotic journey that we went to. But the story I always tell is I used to be a management consultant, right? The management consultant, you do like, is there a market for X, Y, and Z? Classical thing. And what you will do is you'll plot things, opportunities, market segments onto a 2x2 matrix, market growth versus unmet needs or something along that kind. And then you plot everything on there. And then there's a top right-hand quadrant that says, here's the land of opportunity, this sector, this thing, right? And you think, that's my job done, we're off. And it's true that the need or the problem exists in that space, but that is only half the work, because then you have to go into that space, find the subspace where the problem really resides. In that subspace, you have to find the people that have the problem, and then you have to find the people that have the money to solve that problem. And that's actually quite a long-winded, intensive, and very unpleasant process. And the way that I see it is that there is not a really elegant way. You can hypothesize, I want to go into this domain, and all you can do is go into that domain and tell your story again and again, tune your story, and hope people will catch up, and hope that you find. It's kind of like following the seam of, like when you're mining and you hit the little seam of gold, and you know, well, I have to follow this thing till I find the real mother lode, literally, right? But that's a long winded process, and the process becomes more difficult because, as I said, we go into these different segments. We have to learn the language of the different segments, who is a problem owner. But one of the very simple problems is that if a problem is deemed unsolvable or just a fact of life, nobody has a budget to solve that problem, right? So if you come with quite a cool solution and you go, it's going to cost you X, Y, Z, there's actually, especially in larger organizations, a big cycle that goes, can we now find the money to address this? Or can you find the people that have the money to address this? So there's a lot of iteration in there. And then the last thing I'd say is the form factor of your solution. So an illustration there is, we started out selling our service as an API. We said we have an API to do this, right? You can give us a location, and then, you know, Mr. Lawnmower Company, when you do this, blah, 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 blah. But it's actually a very, you know, disembodied concept, an API. You know, you put something in, something comes out, but what comes out is usually used in another piece of software. So what we found is we had to like visualize and instantiate what this information that we provided looked like. And then people went, oh, so this is a nice little interface, and I can click this and this will appear and it will look like this. And so, yeah. And then they would use it, and then they go, after 3 months, they go, okay, this is really cool, but we're kind of sick and tired of clicking this. Do you have an API?
Excellent.
Yes, we do have an API. But it shows you that it's not because you have an API that you can sell an API, that you know, you actually have to go very, very long winded routes to actually find that product market fit, right?
Yeah,
and
it's nice to know that a map was required to help in the sale there. Although, sorry, I interrupted you with an important phrase there: product market fit.
Sorry, yes. So product market fit is not only, you know, does the problem fit this, or so does the solution fit the problem? It's also, does the solution fit the problem in a way that people are looking for that solution understand? So it's much more than problem and solution. It's people, organization, politics, marketing, whatever. And that for us has been quite an extensive process, a lot of hit and miss. And I can now tell the story very well, but I can tell you when I was in the middle of it, it was often very frustrating.
Wow. So that's the lengthiest, most detailed answer I've ever had to how you work backwards from customer needs. I feel like a way for me to be effective going forward is to find more management consultants to talk to. It's always sounded like a really stuffy discipline, but this is amazing, the insight.
I can also make you some good slides about this.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah, you always need to have a slide deck, right? There's like some McKinsey or something, Boston Consulting Group. Yeah, oh my God.
Something that makes sense of the chaos of life and entrepreneurial existence, our geospatial existence.
At the risk of making this podcast into an embodiment of LinkedIn, yes. Okay, that's amazing. So perhaps we could get a bit more detail about the business from the perspective of incentives. So what's the skin in the game of owners, management, and staff?
Okay, so let's say that I am one of the major owners, or still the largest owner of shares in the company. So I started this company I have one, let's call it reference shareholder, so a company that's also active in these domains and that took a strategic stake in our business. And then we have a bunch of angel investors that helped us get on the way. And in terms of the people that work for us, they don't have shares yet, but we're hoping to change that this year as we grow and mature. I think that's going to become an important part, because one of the things that I learned is what you learn in your entrepreneurial journey is what you're good at and what you're not good at, right? And I think as a good management consultant, I'm good at conceptualizing, at coming up with, seeing the market need, finding the market need, describing the product that you think is required. But then I have a fantastic team that actually takes my hand wavy stuff and goes and makes something. And then I go, no, I didn't want that. I want that. And they tolerate that, which I am immensely grateful for. But yes, and so we are going to have to need to put that part in place and give them a stake in the success of the company just beyond pure monetary.
You said that you convinced some angel investors to put some money in. So were they also looking for whether the team had skin in the game?
Not at that stage, because at that stage it was just myself and a co-founder who has now moved on. But I didn't see that at that time as a key question they asked.
Oh, no. That's interesting. Okay, I guess back then, by definition, you had skin in the game. So
yeah.
Okay, so then how fast and sticky is growth?
Well, we are not a VC fueled rocket ship, so we don't have 300-400% revenue growth every year or every month. We are very much what I call a practical founder business, which, if I can plug somebody else's podcast here, the Practical Founder podcast is a really good one for people who start businesses that are in the software space that are not VC rocket ships. So we grow, I'd say, between 20 and 50% a year. So it's more linear than it is exponential. But what I find very satisfying is that we exist free of whatever the current VC fashion is, right? The VC fashion coming out of COVID was, burn money, capture market share, and then the interest rates went bananas, and then it was preserve cash, get to profitability. Now it's, get your hands onto generative AI,
right.
And we can exist outside of that. We do our thing, we grow it, we are opportunistic in what we address, but we don't have to run after the latest fashion or justify our existence every 6 months against a changing fashion benchmark. The opposite of that is we grow linearly, and I have the great privilege that we have investors that are being very patient with us. So yeah, that's where we are.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's all down to who you compare yourselves to, but 20 to 50% growth, I wouldn't have said necessarily was linear. Okay, so we've already gotten into the topic of geospatial entrepreneurship and geospatial for people who don't do geospatial. You've begun to, I guess, get into it, mentioning your management consulting career. I'd like to round out that topic a bit if you've got some more commentary.
Yeah, sure. So we are a geospatial business. We are all about information that is tied to a certain location. But the way that I like to describe it is that by nature or by origin, I'm a data nerd, right? I always like a good spreadsheet and a bit of pivoting and a bit of, querying of the data to see what happens. So when we started the business, we looked at it from that way, but realized very quickly that the information was only relevant when put into a location context. So it had to be put on a map. And as we started doing that, we had to familiarize ourselves with the technology or technologies or the tools that existed to do that. In our case, our breakthrough came through QGIS. I'm a great QGIS fan. I think it's the best thing since sliced bread. I did spend 6 months watching endless YouTube tutorials to get my head around it and yelling out in frustration when something fairly simple, I could not figure out until somebody said, click here, click that, and do that. And once you get your head around it, anyways, that's a bit of a...
Everyone uses YouTube for the same thing, and I still do myself. So
yeah. And that's also the power of it, right? That you can find it, and that there are actually many, many people that you can then ask to help you. So, but the point of it is, we saw geospatial as an additional dimension that required, certain tools in the same way that analyzing data, requires you to understand SQL or have a rudimentary understanding of how that works, that, that geospatial was just another dimension. And I think that's very different from the traditional angle to geospatial, which in my view, and we've brushed up against it and we've kind of recoiled from it, which is very much, I don't know if it's a cult or a clique of people using...
both words apply. I love it. I wanted to say that it's something really meaningful actually about this episode for me, and I think a lot of people in geospatial, in the clique or the cult, is that you offer an outsider's perspective. You're driving by, taking what you need and continuing on.
Yeah, that's a very, very good description. And we're not married to it, right? It's like, does it get us to what we want? If yes, then it's useful and we load it up. And I'm in awe of what it can do and the cool things that you and I think also across many sectors there's a lot of underappreciation of what it can do, which I think to a certain extent is driven by it having been perceived as being a separate silo and a separate technology stack that existed in things like, zoning and planning, forestry, waterways, those kind of things. But actually, our view is that it can be used so much more and in so many more domains. But we're not married to a technology. We kind of like the open source stuff or the multi-purpose stuff. And for a while, and we still go actually to these like very specialized geo exhibitions and events, but we notice that we go, actually there's so many use cases, and actually this is all about, I don't know, measuring landmass or accurate GPS technology, which is relevant, but actually it and I think the sector does itself a disfavor by positioning itself as saying we do geospatial. It's like you don't. You do data that just happen to have a geo. And most of the world, that's how they think. They don't think about maps and all that. They're just a tool they use.
Yeah, it's
and
just
they're
another
wonderful
column
tools.
in a database. Yeah.
Yes, they're wonderful tools. They're fantastic tools. And my wife says that when we go on holiday, we go often go, sunny, wild holidays. I love looking at the map before we go and go, okay, what can I see from this map? How can I imagine the terrain? But you have to not be all about that just by itself. It's just another dimension. And That's just how we treat it. And I find it utterly fascinating, but I'm very careful not to get sucked into the orbit of being just about that.
Yeah, this perspective is really valuable. Maybe the best way to put it, or to understand why we should listen to what you're saying, is that you're a successful entrepreneur who started up a business which has a geospatial component. So I think it's worth listening to your perspective. Maybe from the insider's view, I can offer that a phrase that for most of my career has been doing the rounds is spatial is special. And this is, sort of coupled with something that's done, or it's been encouraged by the dominant, essentially the monopoly holder of the industry, Esri, to have a GIS day. And, when it comes down to it, really, that's just having all of their clients effectively advertise their software. But it's, you can, like every discipline probably has, discipline name is special. But actually, the message I think that's more useful to everyone is that spatial should not be special. And that we should do everything we possibly can in terms of broadening our audience and getting more customers to make spatial as non-special as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the more you can embed it or mesh it into the normal technology stack or the normal user interface, the better. And that does require the meeting of the two sides, right? I think geospatial specialists need to come out of their technology silo and understand how they relate to things like database, how they relate to things like front-end technologies, how they relate to languages like Python and all that. So they need to kind of come out of that a little bit and break out of their tool. They don't have to know everything. Nobody knows everything, right? But you need to be able to bridge into those. And similarly, back-end and front-end need to do the same and go, okay, why is spatial different? How do I account for that? But yeah, the more it can just become another link in the technology chain as opposed to a separate silo, the better it is for all. And one of the things that we have seen is that geospatial professionals that can do that, they can suddenly open up such more, I think their career opportunities become much more interesting.
They have far more customers.
Because they have far more customers, far more interaction points, and they kind of get away from that utilities zoning waterway world where they have always lived to doing something that is much more interesting and where they're not just an adjunct to the organization, but much more core part of it, in my opinion, right?
I'm laughing because I'm here in Atlanta. These building footprints, I always get to making this point in every episode, are from Atlanta. But every job, I kid you not, that I'm seeing here is something to do with Georgia Power and their gas network or electricity utility network.
Yeah.
And another thing a couple more things I was thinking as you were speaking. So we need to do we have a specialist discipline for every time you add a date field to your database? No, we don't. People just add a date field and they put their dates in. Do we have a specialist discipline for every time you put a text field in your database? No, you just add a text field and you start typing away. So the message I'm getting is that you want it to be as easy and intuitive as that. Another thing I want to say is that Javier, the founder of Carto, by the way, Carto will be appearing soon on the podcast via Helen McKenzie. He says the same thing, that geospatial has a problem, that our data is not as easily integrated with general information insight platforms as other types of data, and it's on the industry to make that happen. So what you're saying has the backing of Javier, and I think Carto is a decent company. So
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mention Carto because we think that platforms like Carto and QGIS, they're not quite there yet, but they're getting there in the sense that I think we're getting to what I call a Tableau moment in geospatial. And I'm a bit longer in the tooth than most entrepreneurs, so I can go, I remember 10 years ago when phones were bricks and blah, blah, blah. But I remember 10 years ago when Tableau first came out. What Tableau did is it was a reasonably user-friendly tool. It still required specialized resources, but not deep programmers. And that unlocked what was then called analytics or big data, right? Before that, analytics and big data was essentially an IT discipline of people programming in Python and creating cool visuals, but actually it was a lot of hard work with very deep specialized resources. And what Tableau did is it kind of put it more into the traditional stack and made it usable by people who understand functionality without necessarily being deep technical. And that unlocked, pretty graphics and bubble charts and what have you, that lit the fire under the imagination of people that went, oh, wow, this is what they're talking about. This is what I can see in that data. And I think the Cartos and the QGISs of this world, and a lot of other brands are available, are trying to do that. And I think the geospatial world is getting to that state, to its Tableau moment. And that really excites me because there's a lot of things that you can do with locations across a lot of industries that people never thought about. We just happen to do this with this telecom data, but we see it every day. And yeah, that's really exciting, I think.
That way of looking at things is really useful. So I've, been a diligent podcaster, I hope, in the industry, and I've profiled Felt, I've profiled GIS Carta, we've had Atlas on, and as I said, I'm chasing Carto. We've had Proxy.co on. That was more about their comical maps GPT thing, but still, they're another web GIS or web mapping platform. So now, you saying that helps me understand the direction the outside world is hoping these entrepreneurs go in to create, as you're saying, the Tableau moment of geospatial. I love this. It helps me, at least in how I should continue inquiring with these web GISs.
Glad to be helpful.
Yeah, good. Okay, so then let's look a bit more at telecoms. That's been a theme of what you've been saying. So what's the state of geospatial technology in telecoms? How well is it used? How well is it understood? How do you see this evolving in the near future?
Okay, it ties to what I said previously, right? In the sense that, we are at this inflection moment around geospatial. And one of the sectors where I see this personally is in telecommunications. Because on the one hand, telecommunications is inherently geographical in its nature, right? Broadband lines need to go through streets, need to follow certain routes, need to connect certain things, and those things are in places. Cell towers are in certain locations, radiate their signal over a certain geography, which means that the data is caught in a certain way. And so you expect this data to be so geospatial and therefore for geospatial knowledge and capabilities to permeate that sector, which actually it doesn't, especially in the telecom companies. Telecom is a technology sector, but it's actually quite old and it's quite rigid in the way that it does things because, it's an engineering business above all, and it kind of,
I'm quite familiar with the effects of engineering businesses, having had that as my career.
So the penalty, I guess, in an engineering business, the penalty for getting it wrong is much higher than the reward for getting it right. So, people wanting to move to fancy new ways of doing things or slightly revolutionary or out of the ordinary, there is quite a bit of resistance on that. So yeah, we see that like, oh my God, there's so much geospatial information. Everybody should kind of know this. And on the other hand, it is so far from it. And we had this experience with one fiber provider where we did a piece of business and we said, look, we have this service whereby we can do assess the quality of an indoor signal in a given building by just clicking on it, doing some calculations. And it's pretty good, I like to think. I would say that, of course, but the point of this story is not to promote that product, but we were demonstrating this to the customer who was interested for a certain piece of information on that. And they said, okay, this is really fantastic. Can you do 10 buildings? I said, yes, we can do 10 buildings. It's a piece of software. Click, 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 click. 10 times, 10 outputs came out, and the outputs came out as PDF files that had a lot of data about what was happening in that building. And then they said, okay, can you now do it for 300 buildings? We said, yes, it is software. We can do it for 300 buildings. We just load up, the file, run the little script, out it comes. And it says, yes, but we have a problem. We, we can't manually go to 300 PDFs to select whatever is interesting. We said, that's not a problem, because the data that will come out as a GeoJSON. You can then load it into a GIS, and then you can filter and slice and dice like you would do an Excel sheet, but then on a map. And they went, what's a GeoJSON? What's a GIS? And that's when it brought it home to me. I mean, the whole problem space, right? One, in the end, we found people that in their department that actually knew what that was, but they were buried deep in the basement, and they use a tool that was actually a CAD/CAM system rather than a geospatial system. And I thought, oh my God, this is never going to end up well. But it illustrated all that. They didn't know the technologies that were available. The technologies were not permeated. It could unlock so much value. And when we explained the tools that we use, that was a big aha moment for them. So that kind of brings it all together. So that the telecom sector, yes, it's geographic. It could actually take probably a lot of lessons from the utility sector that has been using geospatial for a long time. So we are very excited because we can see many opportunities and potential beyond what we are doing around mobile in that space. So for example, there is a lot of things going on now with data centers and AI, right? And so there was this investment in the US, it was $500 billion or something like that. But the point is, a data center has to be put somewhere, and that somewhere needs to have power, and that somewhere needs to have connectivity and a bunch of other stuff. So that's where you see location as an example coming together and really forcing that sector to get its act together. And right. We are excited about being in that wave and being part of that. But it's not there yet. It's getting there.
Yeah.
Again, very long-winded answer.
No. Once again, you have a great story about detecting customer needs. Yeah, I'm really appreciating, honestly, all of the wisdom and knowledge and experience you have here, Christian.
My wife usually doesn't do that, so it's good to hear somebody, or my kids for that matter.
You've always got a receptive audience here. Okay.
That's good.
With that, we're on to the last item. So what are the challenges and learnings of selling geospatial data across a variety of niche markets?
Well, one is not to call it geospatial data, to just call it data,
yeah.
Right? And that just happens to have a geospatial dimension.
Yeah.
And the second one is how you tell the story, right? I mentioned H3 indexing, which if you're a geospatial aficionado, it goes, oh yes, of course, H3 indexing. The amounts of times that we had to tune and we say, we use a thing called H3 indexing. Do you know what that is? Does that sound familiar? Because the interesting thing is, as you are in this flux moment, you're actually selling to some people that know everything. So you have to be very careful not to teach them to suck eggs, right? You have people that know very little about this dimension of it. So you have to very carefully walk them along. So don't call it geospatial. Tune your story to what your audience knows and understands, and check often with what they know and understand. And I think the third one is make it look good, make it look pretty. Having a nice interface where things light up on a map and where you can show that actually matters, especially if you're selling something that is not understood, right? It's a bit, Elon Musk is a bit, the tainted name these days of people. Some people like him, some people don't like him, but he was very good at that, to say, this is what it will look like. Look, here is a rocket. Here is a car, an electrical car. It looks good. You understand by looking at it what it is. So that kind of visual representation, visual storytelling, explaining what you mean is very important. You know, again, if you're selling something into a category that did not exist before, right? So those would be my 3 tips or my 3 observations, for lack of a better word, of how to sell geospatial into niche markets.
Great. Regarding the last one, you're reminding me of an episode with Linda Stevens, who was the Chief Marketing Officer at Esri. One of the episodes that I did with her was about vision. Does the word vision apply to what you're saying?
Does the word vision apply to what we're saying? That's a very interesting question. I started out by selling vision. And again, coming from management consulting industry, you sell a lot of vision. Okay. In the sense you sell stuff and say, I have this great idea, and here are some slideware that will you know, explain how I'm going to deliver this thing and how fantastic it's going to be. And if you're a management consultant for McKinsey or an Accenture for that matter, you have that entire machine behind you that will give you that credibility that you can do that. When you're a small business, that does not work. And that was one of the painful lessons I had to learn. So one of the things that we did in our journey was to go, okay, I have a vision. I can talk eloquently about what we can do with geospatial in a market, but you do not sell that. What you sell is a product that solves a problem in a way that people understand. And I call that hammer and nail. Okay. You, Mr. Customer, have a nail. I have a hammer. Look, bang, the nail goes in. Ain't that great? Give me £5. And if you got me drunk, I can wax eloquently about the, you know, the beautiful engineering, the thought, the vision that went into the hammer, but you do not sell that vision because they don't care. And you're going to misfire, right? Afterwards, they will come to you and say, I have this screw that I'm trying to get into. Do you have a vision for, and you go, yes, I have a vision for pushing all kinds of stuff into wood. But what the people care about at the first place is nail, wood, how, right? You go, hammer. Fantastic. Okay, great. And then later on, you talk about vision. And I guess the last point of it is to be an entrepreneur into a space that is not predefined, you have to have that vision. But what you sell is a product, and the product solves a problem in a way that people understand. And vision is this cool thing on a Friday night when you have a cigar and a good glass of wine, but not when you're trying to sell. Yeah, that's my vision on vision.
That's fantastic. All of the answers, I just love the way that you're putting it. You used the term eloquence a few times. Indeed, it does apply, I think, to the way you're putting things across. You've mentioned as my last unscripted question, or as if I can, if I'm allowed to ask you one unscripted question, you mentioned hex bins basically, or the H3 index. I've seen it's been popular, I guess, over the past at least 5 years, 10 years. But in my own work, often at engineering firms, we've never been asked to use it as a way of visualizing things. So it's really nice to finally see a company that's actually using that. Obviously, Uber did to index the planet. And actually come to think of it, Cardo often uses it in their demonstrations of their platform. So did you look at other ways of visualizing your signal strength data? Why did you settle
we
on
did.
H3?
I guess we looked at traditional heat maps, which I did not like because the way heat maps are created, it's actually quite fluid and it's difficult to pin down. And so
do they offer a false sense of precision?
I think they do. And you know, traditional coverage maps are essentially heat maps, right? And what happens is we start to zoom in, they become this soup that you're navigating in, and this fog. And I really didn't like that. I wanted to have something that said, in this location, this is what is happening. But then you get into the question of what is it, very philosophical question, but what is a location? Is it a point, which, in the end it is, but, you can't chop up the world in points. It'd be infinite, mathematically speaking. So that you can't do that. So how do you bucketize it in something that looks like it? So you need a bucket to put it in. And then I'm not going to claim that we did an extensive feasibility, but we came across it. And I thought, okay, I mean, to be honest, the way that we did it was we came across it, said, oh, there's an API. It seems to be reasonably well understood by most people. Let's run with that. Pick it up, go. All right. As an entrepreneur, you must not overthink things too much.
Gotcha.
So that's how we got to it. But when I then came to it afterwards, I thought this is actually really, really well thought out. And I thought it was, once you get your head around it, and I did have a thing with like Buckminster Fuller and Buckminster Fullerene and all that kind of stuff.
All of that is awesome.
And you go, okay, this is where it ties back. And there's something magical about hexagons, right? Have you ever thought of the fact that a beehive, which is made by these organic, intelligence maybe not the right word, or sentient, maybe they are sentient, but their intelligence works in a different way. They're not rational things, they're bees, right? That they make these perfect hexagons, which is this perfect geometrical shape in this organic world. Why is that? And it's because they have a very specific mathematical characteristics that you go, this is actually really, really, really cool. And I think it's incredibly powerful, and I'm the greatest fan of all the indexing systems. And if you look at other things, you go, that is so unelegant, right? So if you have, for example, when people do things, we've seen data aggregated into squares, and squares, don't really work. It's not, and in terms of computing power and everything else, it doesn't work as elegantly as hexagons. So yeah, it's a very nerdy and deep, not deep technical, but very nerdy subject. But I really, I'm a really big fan. So I would recommend it. Anything where data needs to be aggregated in a spatial dimension, H3. Hexagons are bestagons. So,
I love it. That's a great quip to end things on, and I love the reference to nature there as well. In terms of architecture-ish perspectives, I'm also reminded of Gaudi's architecture and the references to nature there.
Yeah.
I know Buckminster Fuller was known for almost day-long lectures about how the world functions. So good to have a few references to that world as well.
And it's always fun to have a bit of a nerd out,
Yes.
That's
on all fronts, Christian. It's been a real privilege. We've got the audience has seen entrepreneurship in action through what you've brought to life through your mobile data strength signal assessment platform, if I can put it that way. Most importantly, thanks for signaling us entering the modern world through enabling the sales of these robotic lawnmowers. I'm going to go and check them out, see how much they cost.
There you go. Thank you for your time, Will, and it's been a great pleasure. Thank you.